Good morning,
Good
Maya.
morning, Timothy. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm reporting today from you live from the deck of the good ship Santana.
That's wonderful to know. How's the weather there?
It's good. It rained a lot last night, but we kind of knew that it would pass over today. And as soon as I finish the briefing, then I'm on my way. I'll hoist the sails and head out to the Miura Peninsula side of Tokyo Bay.
Great. It looks like there is a lot to talk about as Japanese morning Prime Minister, former Prime Minister Abe. A lot of things have been happening. So there was an upper house election, and still the government is actually trying to deal with the challenge of putting the country back on the track to recovery. So a lot of policies have been voted, I guess, and there is a lot to talk about. And without any further ado, so I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you very much, Maya. Let's get right into it. And good morning, everyone, from Katsuyama, which is a small fishing port on the Chiba Peninsula. There is, like Maya said, an awful lot to talk about. Last week, the briefing, unfortunately, focused almost exclusively on the assassination and the passing of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Very sad, and it really took up all of the news. We have, just so much stuff going on in Tokyo and in Japan politically these days. And we just actually missed a whole week of reporting what was going on during the election last week, and then we've got the whole week of news this week too. So I'd like to get into that. Obviously, we need to talk about the election, what happened with the election, how the LDP did, and I'm getting rained on now. We have to talk about Mr. Abe's passing. What is the plan for that? What's going to happen with the Abe faction? What's going on with the economy? The yen hit 138, 139 just this week. It looks like the psychological barrier of 140 will be eclipsed this week. And a lot is going on with regional and with diplomacy. Mr. Kishida's forte. And what is he going to do now that the election is over, now that he has a mandate, which he will claim? He has something of a mandate, but I think it's a little bit unfair, but they will run that one to ground. So first of all, let's talk about the passing of Mr. Abe. There will be a state funeral. It's the first one since 1969. It's something unusual for the Japanese to identify a political leader and give him a state funeral. But this one will be pretty important. I think it's not Mr. Kishida's wish because it still highlights the shadow of Mr. Abe, who had the largest political faction within the LDP, almost twice as large as Mr. Kishida's faction, and preventing Mr. Kishida from being a little bit more descriptive or rambunctious or a little bit more exploratory in his policies. That's not quite like him, actually, personality-wise. But he was hampered quite a bit by Mr. Abe, who was kind of a shadow prime minister. He was wielding a lot of power in factional politics. And as people who on this show know, it's the LDP that rules Japanese politics. And that's not the end of the story. It is also LDP factions. So you really need to have a good handle on LDP factional politics and see what's going on there. What are the numbers? What are the personalities? What kind of fights and alliances are going on within the LDP factions? There are 6 of them. And we talk a pretty good deal about that whenever we talk about Japanese politics. So with Mr. Kishida now somewhat relieved of that weight, Mr. Abe carried such a posture, and he really controlled his faction, I think, far stronger than many of the other leaders of their own individual factions hold over them. You'll remember that in the election for prime minister to succeed Mr. Suga, Mr. Abe did not select somebody in his faction to be a contender for prime minister. He chose somebody outside of the faction. He chose Sanai Takaichi. Um, Takaichi, excuse me, I always mispronounce her last name, Takaichi. Um, and although she lost, she became the policy director within the LDP. So she is very closely tied to Mr. Abe. She's beholden to him. She is a strong independent figure in her own right. And so it's a bit of a bane for Mr. Kishida. The Diet session has finished. It closed in order for the country to prepare for the elections. The Diet will not go back into session until October. We've got the Obon holidays towards the end of August. And so we've got July, August, September, and then the Diet session starts in October. During this period of time, Mr. Kishida will be very, very active, and you'll see a lot of news coming out, a lot of press reports coming out about what the individual ministries are doing to pursue his policies. There's also suspected to be a cabinet reshuffle. This is a really key thing to watch out for. One idea is to clean the slate and to purge those individuals that were placed there, that won those positions, as a kind of a calculus of the LDP factional politics. Who's on top? How many seats do they have? That sort of thing. So there are a couple of key positions. Mr. Hagiura, who is a very key person in the Abe faction, is a minister who is under some sort of review. You've also got Sanai Takaichi, who is the policy secretary within the LDP structure. It's not a ministerial post; it is a party post. You've got Suzuki, who is the brother-in-law. I'm sorry, the brother-in-law of Taro Aso, who is in finance. And you've got Mr. Kishi, who is the brother-in-law of, or the younger brother of Mr. Abe, as defense. So it's really unclear how that move will be taken. And so all eyes are watching that to see how Mr. Kishida establishes his presence and moves the position forward. He's really got a bit of time where he can play with that. Typically, it takes some time between the election and the cabinet reshuffle. He might move quickly. He might move slowly. Only time will tell. And I think events that unfold between now and whenever he makes that decision will really guide it. There's a lot going on. North Korea has been very quiet, as you might have noticed. There is some unnecessary action that's going on there, but diplomatically, the United States, South Korea, and Japan are really starting to pull together. There's so much going on in that area. But with regard to Mr. Kishida and how he's going to move the country forward, the first item of business, not for him, but he's watching it from afar, is what's happening with the Abe faction. So, gosh, it's just really sad because Mr. Abe carried so much weight internationally. I mean, countries are flying their flags at half mast. Even some municipalities in Japan are following that. Who takes over after Mr. Abe is a key question. And I think what's happened inside LDP Abe faction politics is that they couldn't decide and they couldn't gather their forces behind any one individual. So they have a coalition of leaders to provisionally lead the Abe faction. There are about 6-7 individuals who will take a seat at that commission, at that committee to lead the faction. I don't know if that's going to work. I think it's just a stopgap measure. It's just I don't know how to describe it, but it's what is to be expected if there was no number two. And I think one of the reasons why Mr. Abe stayed in power for so long was because he had been betrayed, like many politicians, many powerful politicians, so many times by people who were close to him, people who supported him. And when the time came, it just they decided, that it was time for them to make a call that benefited them, not necessarily the person helped put them there. And that happens pretty frequently in Japanese politics, happens in politics everywhere. So as a consequence of that, there is no clear leader, and there is no individual who has had the opportunity to really um, dynamically expose themselves, because it's frequently seen as unpolitic, impolite, and somewhat shameful for individuals to do that, especially if you've got a clear boss who you're kowtowing to. So we can see there will be a great effort devoted to keeping this cohesion together. I personally just don't think it will last very long, and I think it's just a recipe for other factions to be created. You will remember that the biggest impetus for creating a new faction is led by Mr. Suga, former Prime Minister Suga, who has probably 30, 35, 40 people who are waiting for him to establish this group, or to take this group from the group status into something a little bit more formal. And I think a lot of people who are in the Abe faction would be inclined to join Mr. Suga. Mr. Suga and Mr. Abe were very close, as you might know. So there is some real disruption that I think we're headed for there. And in the meantime, Mr. Kishida is going to be going gung-ho on establishing his faction, because he wants to stay prime minister. In the next 3 years, there is no big, huge national political event going on. No vote for upper house, for lower house, for prime minister. There's a 3-year pause now. Many people think that this is a kind of a holiday time for Mr. Kishida. It is definitely not. There will be lots of challenges. The Diet will have an extraordinary session in October. It'll close in December, and then it'll reemerge in January for the constitutionally mandated 150-day Diet session, which passes the budget. And that's where Mr. Kishida will really be shining his administration and trying to create his stamp. He has said publicly, there are a couple of things that came out just recently from the prime minister that are noteworthy. One is that this idea of constitutional revision, I think we really need to move forward on this in honor of our fallen former prime minister, Mr. Abe, which this was one of his vanguard issues, and I think we should do that. And I told you that that's exactly what would happen. But it didn't take but a couple of days after the election before he said that. And the second thing that came up was the restart of these paused nuclear reactors. It is unavoidable that Japan is going to be suffering from energy crisis. It's already showing itself. They've put in price controls and subsidies for gasoline, but it really is going to be much broader and much deeper. With the yen at 139, 140, and once it breaks that psychological barrier, then it likely will very quickly go to 150, and that's going to have a huge impact on everything. 90% of all resources, energy resources for Japan are imported. And Russia just announced this last week as a kind of a slap in the face. They're watching this. They're hoping Mr. Kishida is a little bit more sanguine about dealing with Russia. He is different from Mr. Abe, and with Mr. Abe gone, in comparison, Mr. Kishida's remarks seem a little bit bold. Mr. Abe, and with Mr. Abe there, he had been fostering a relationship with Russia for 12 years with Vladimir Putin, and very successfully. Not a lot came out of it, but it was enough to keep things kind of at an even keel. That looks to be wide open now. So there is the Sakhalin-2 project in north of Hokkaido on the island of Sakhalin, oil and gas. The Russians have taken over that. They have diverted all of the shares into a private company. And so Mitsui and Mitsubishi are kind of SOL. They're out of luck there. They're still negotiating, and it doesn't appear right now whether the gas and the oil will stop immediately, but still, it's an option that Mr. Putin has, and I think he's going to utilize that. So this dealing with the sanctions, which very much benefited Mr. Kishida, and rose his profile. You know, the Japanese voting population thought that this was the right posture to take. There were two issues that Mr. Kishida really benefited from, and that was his posture with regard to the COVID response and keeping the tourists out, keeping the doors closed, but slowly, gradually going in, restarting the Go To campaign, and increasing the inoculations. That has changed too, by the way. But also on his really quick and just a contributory response to the sanctions that were pursued by the West, particularly by the United States. So that lockstep movement really did well for him, and the voting population seemed to appreciate that. Unfortunately, the Russians don't, and so I think they will extract their ounce of vengeance from that. And so I think going into the summer and particularly into the autumn, there's going to be a lot of disruption in oil and energy. So as a consequence of that, I mean, it's just inevitable. The Japanese need to get that energy. The United States isn't going to supply it. The supply is tight, and the nuclear, even full blown nuclear, is not going to be providing more than 24%. But still, it's less than 10% right now. So look forward to a lot of that going on. We can't talk about Japanese politics without talking about the corona wave, the seventh wave that we are in now. It is huge. This time last week, actually just before the elections, compared to that point in time and now, five-fold increase in corona infections. And I'm sure everybody that's on this in this briefing has realized that. I mean, I've got people in my circle that have caught corona where we were really lucky before that. So it is really virulent. It is hitting a lot of companies, and it is spreading fast. Interestingly enough, the Kishida administration's posture on this one is let's hold off on imposing restrictions. Let's let the economy go. They've made a decision now that the decisions to close down the economy, to keep people working from home, to do all of these things, really created a great damage to the economy. And they can't afford that. They just really can't do that. So they're going to let it go. They are going to enhance on inoculations. Of course, anyone 60 years and older, and there's a high percentage, more than 90% of the people who are 60 and older have gotten their fourth booster shot. But when it goes to younger kids, I mean, the most kids, teens in their 20s, have received their shots, but not the third shot, and definitely not the fourth shot. So I think maybe the third shot is in the 5-10% of people under 30s to receive that. So he's beginning to push on having more inoculations, opening that up. He's got the first responders and healthcare workers to get their fourth shot now. So the push is there, but it's backing off on restricting. At the same time, you might remember the Go To campaign. It's gone, right? We don't even call it the Go To campaign. It's under another moniker, but they've killed the Go To campaign. It has survived in another kind of combination, and this combination is divided and controlled by the prefectural offices. So for people in the prefecture who are traveling within the prefecture and to the next adjacent prefecture, they have a campaign now that is sponsored by the prefectures and also by the national government. So it's not called the Go To campaign. It's a kind of a child of the Go To campaign. Since the prime minister has said we want to kind of keep things down, we're not going to launch this new campaign. It was supposed to go from July until the end of August, which is right around Obon. They wanted to jigger that. They wanted to goose the travel and tourism industry because it's such a key element to the economy. It just impacts and inflects on other things. I mean, you can see for yourself, even leading up to the election and even over the weekend, there are so many people out on the streets now, and it does have this effect of boosting enthusiasm and mood. And the prime minister understands that, policymakers understand that, and they were hoping to get that boost. They backed off on it and said, we're not going to initiate that campaign. But in the other room, the prime minister has said, we have vouchers, we have subsidies under a different kind of plan for people who are traveling within the country. So please continue to make your travel plan. So it's kind of saying different things with the same mouth. At the same time, there is no diminution in the amount of tourists that are coming in. So that mode of bringing the tourists in was 7,000, then it was 10,000, now it's 20,000, and that will continue and likely not have much of an impact. On that one note, though, Maxima Kedin, who is the minister of the newly created under the Suga administration, the digital agency, traveled to the United States and could not come back last week. She caught COVID while she was in the United States, unfortunately. The economy, as I said, is taking a bit of a hit. More producers have announced, and probably it's now more than 90% of the producers have said that they will raise their prices. And that's on products across the board: cars, air conditioners, foodstuffs, energy. It's going everywhere, and it's going to get worse. And so the prime minister is in a bit of a bind to, if prices are going up, what is happening with his new economy? There have been other pronouncements on that. I've been in several briefings where ministers of state have talked about that, but the details are so skinny. I mean, I was in a briefing on Thursday where there was a 40-page presentation in a breakfast briefing, and of course we walked through the entire presentation, 40 pages. A minister of state doing that, pretty amazing. But the new economy, the new capitalism, contained two pictures on that, 2 slides on that briefing. So even the ministers are a little bit unsure. They're a little bit afraid to step out. But definitely, the prime minister has to encourage companies to increase wages for their employees. So his idea, it's not in implementation now, is probably to tax them if they don't relinquish more of their wealth. So if you've looked at graphs about the income increase and the amount of revenue that is being held and generated by companies, the distinction is really stark. The economy, the salaries for the workers remains very flat, and the revenues of the companies just continues to get higher. This is a benefit of Abenomics. Obviously, the 3 arrows that produced a great windfall for the corporates and for the stock market, but did little for the working man. That has to change, and the prime minister is at a bit of a bind on how to do that. He did announce one of the other things that happened just this last week of having a cabinet position responsible for startups. So startups are really big. South Korea has a really vibrant startup community, and they have a minister in charge of startups. And the Japanese have looked at that and studied it. They're not going full blown with a kind of a ministry or an agency on startups. Maybe that will come up next year. I'm not sure, but he has said, I want this particular responsibility to be assigned to a cabinet minister. So it's not the same thing as having a cabinet post, although the reports came out seem to suggest that it is not another cabinet portfolio. It's not a new agency. It's just another thing for a very busy cabinet individual to do. So we don't know who that individual is going to be. Probably METI or the state minister. We'll see probably within the next 2 or 3 weeks. The other thing that's a real interesting thing that happened is that we talk about some of the important legal decisions that are made in Japan because they do signal, the temperature and the kind of boundaries of Japanese culture with regard to certain issues that are presented. For example, capital executions, or the death of people who are held in confinement, that sort of thing. So this last week, the court ruled that the TEPCO executives are responsible for the meltdown in 311. And so that means that the suit there was a derivative suit that was hoisted against TEPCO. It was also hoisted against the government for the damage that was caused. The Supreme Court came down with a decision 2 or 3 weeks ago that said the government is exonerated from that. It wasn't their fault. They couldn't foresee that sort of a tsunami coming in. They're exonerated. The government is exonerated. The suit also went against TEPCO executives, and the decision there was, yes, TEPCO should have anticipated it. They are guilty. The 13 trillion yen damage claim should go through and be hoisted on these 4 executives who were in charge of the construction and the siting of that power plant. So how that is going to roll out, how those 4 individuals could ever possibly pay that tremendous amount of money remains to be seen. But it's kind of good news that somebody is held accountable. Usually in Japan, lots of things happen. Nobody's really held accountable. It just gets swept under the table, and the victims continue to become victims, and nobody is blamed for it. So it's maybe that's the same thing here. We'll just have to wait and see. But at least the court has said that TEPCO is guilty of that. Let me see what else I've got to talk to you, because I'm getting kind of short on time here. I think I mentioned that South Korea, Japan, and the United States are really starting to gel. You can see how much energy and impetus is being put on this. So Secretary Anthony Blinken was going to Korea last week. The assassination happened midway between his travel. He came to Tokyo to pay his respects. He was in Yokota for probably less than a day. I don't even know if he spent the night. But that's a pretty big deal to have the Secretary of State stop in on his way to South Korea. A lot is going on there. They had a ministerial meeting of foreign ministers, South Korea, United States, and Japan just this last week. Yellen, the Secretary of Finance for the United States, it's not Secretary of Finance, it's, what is it called, the Secretary? Anyway, the Secretary of Finance, Secretary Yellen, the Treasury, Janet Yellen, was also in Tokyo. She cut her trip short just a little bit out of respect of the death of Mr. Abe, but she is here. She's a powerful person. She was 2 days, 3 days here, and then she's in South Korea. So there's an awful lot going on there. The foreign minister was in Japan just this last week. He met with his counterpart, Mr. Hayashi, and with Mr. Kishida. That's a pretty big deal. And they talked about, one of the key issues here is there's a South Korean court that is holding assets of a Japanese company for reparations for damages done during the colonial period in World War II. And that is the bone of contention between Japan and South Korea, that the court is pushing this compensation issue even after conclusively it was decided several years ago. There was a huge payment that was made to South Korea. It sat in South Korea for about 5 days, and then it was rejected, even though it was all agreed upon, and not used. So there was a lot of effort going on there, and that's why the Japanese seem to be a little bit more staunch in their position. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to have this great relationship that is possible with South Korea until we see, progress on this issue. And that's the kind of background there. So hopefully they've crossed that road, and this relationship, it's so critical to the Quad. It's critical to the United States, their position in Asia with what's going on in Okinawa, that sort of thing. And finally, we're seeing some really demonstrable progress there, and I'm very happy to see that. We'll continue to follow that. Also, the Keidanren president was in South Korea talking to business leaders there. So you can see that there's a lot going on. It's not just diplomacy, it's business, it's this texture, it's defense relations as well. I think that's about it. I've gone on for quite a while. Forgive me, Maya. I'm getting a little bit drenched here, but that's okay. It's part of the deal. So there you are. That's Japanese politics for today. I very much look forward to doing this every week. If you've enjoyed this, please let us know. Link up in LinkedIn with myself or Maya, and please join us every Sunday at 8:20 for this briefing. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Aren't you glad I'm here?
right. Thank you for letting me know. Anyway, so thank you for the briefing. Please get indoors before you melt down in the rain, and please move to Clubhouse where we're waiting for you. So thank you for the
Okay.
briefing. See you on the other side then.
I think you very much enjoyed watching me get rained on.
Well, quite a lot, yes. But still, please, okay, stay safe and
Okay.
please come to Clubhouse.
See you on the
over.
Clubhouse side. Thank you.
Thank you.